I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm used to teaching with young people, so you're just going to be young people today, okay? And go with me. You'll notice in the title of the talk I have is Meet My Friend Jesus. And as I was listening to some of your stories and some of the praise, some of the things, I felt, yes, you have met Jesus. But I want to tell you why I met Jesus and why I continue to want to meet him from what he has said to me through his stories. All of us like to do snapshots. Now, you were talking about getting that quick shot of the bird with the snake, and I was thinking, and he couldn't quite finish the shot. So today, we're going to kind of go through a few snapshots of the Bible stories that I believe tell me about my friend Jesus. And I hope when we get through the few snapshots we go through, that you will have a little album and that he will mean something to you. So first of all, in John 3, 1 to 3, or 1 to 2, John 3, 1 to 2, I'll give you a second. We're going to do a few texts. Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him." Now, what I want to catch from this little snapshot is that Nicodemus, as he was thinking about meeting Jesus, how am I going to do this? Because I'm a teacher at Rio Lindo Adventist Academy. And so I kind of understand what he's going through. And so he didn't want to be embarrassed, but he also was a little curious. And so we know that as the evening came, he went around and he knew where Jesus always prayed because he had heard about it, and this was nothing new. And so he quietly went into the garden, and as he came to the garden, that's when he sees Jesus. And then that's when Jesus communicates with Nicodemus. But what I really want you to catch is how Jesus responded. You see, me, as a human, I would have said, "Okay, Nicodemus, you're a teacher. You just said that you think you know about me. Why don't you come to my office in the day and tomorrow?" But Jesus did not do that. Jesus said, "I am going to take some time. Sit here. I'm going to take some time with you, and we're going to talk." And I thought that was so wonderful of a picture of how Jesus responds to us when we are supposed to know better and think we do. But Nicodemus had a need, and Jesus did not put him down. Again, in my own, I would have said, "You've been studying about me. You know pretty much about me, and that's why you're here. Why don't you just see me in the daytime and let others know about it?" But he didn't embarrass Nicodemus when he came to him and talked to him in the garden. And you know the rest of the story. But my little snapshot is learning, what did Jesus do to Nicodemus? Didn't put him down and convinced him that he was God in his way. If you'll take your Bibles and look at Mark 6:38. This is one of my exciting stories. You can tell I get excited when I'm able to talk about Jesus. And I want you to be able to, when you walk out of here, I want your little album to jump out in pictures. But anyway, here we go. Mark 6:38. "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. You know what my snapshot is? It's not that story about him feeding the 5,000 necessarily. My little snapshot is about the young boy. And of course, I love kids. And I can see Jesus looking right at this young man. Now, I imagine when the young man left home. Now, we don't know a lot of the story, but I can imagine his mom made him a lunch, and maybe when she made him his lunch, she said, "Oh, I hope you have a good day," because I remember my mom used to give me a chance to put a little sack together of stuff and go with my buddies for a little while. Now, not go too far. Don't go too far. But you go ahead and go. So I can imagine she says, "Oh, you can go with your friends?" "Yeah, I'm okay." And so he took his little lunch and away he went. But I can imagine as he was walking, he saw that crowd and he became very interested. Now, I don't know if he called his buddy. He said, "Hey, why don't you come with me? Let's see what's going on here. Let's see what he's really talking about." We don't know that part, but I'm suggesting that he did. And so they went along and they came and they sat down. And as they were sitting there, as the day goes on, apparently, as you know the story, apparently Jesus' words were so enthralled for what he wanted to get to them that they didn't want to move. Now, I would love to tell stories where people don't want to move. I was in a classroom at about, and some of them are here, at about 5 minutes before class ends, or 10 minutes, close the book. All right, we're done. We're going. I don't know, but apparently Jesus' words were so fascinating of what he was telling them that even the lad stayed there. See, he stayed in class. Yeah, he didn't run away. He stayed there. So I can imagine as he's sitting there. Now, okay, as we were sitting there, Andrew comes up and you see the man over there is talking? Yeah. Well, he would like your lunch. And I can imagine that Jesus, knowing he loves children, so I imagine him knowing this lad, he probably looked away from the crowd in a way, and he looked right at that young man and grinned and shook his head. "It's okay." But I don't know if the boy sitting with Andrew, if I'd been sitting there and Andrew came up to me and said, "I want your lunch," and I'm looking around going, "Oh yeah? You want what? You want my lunch? Yeah, we're going to feed those people." And me as a kid, I would have gone, "Are you kidding? You want my lunch and you're going to do what with it? You're going to do what?" Well, I'll tell you this. So I can imagine, not only that, as he grabbed the lunch from the lad, Andrew walked over to Jesus and smiled, and maybe Now, if it would have been Peter, I'd have been different. Peter would have come up to him and said, "Hi, I want your lunch. Jesus wants to use it." But we have Andrew, so I figured Andrew was probably a little more polite than Peter was. So takes that lunch. Now, I want to catch, as Jesus went like this out of that lunch, the boy went, What is happening? My lunch? And it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I can imagine that lad going, "Whoa, who is this?" What I want you to catch is how Jesus not only fed the 5,000, but how he cared for that young man, because that young man, when he left home, he had no idea what God was going to do for him. Sometimes we don't know, and you heard some of those things. I heard some of you talking about some of these prayers and things. We do not know what God can do for you if you just give him your lunch. That boy was giving more than he ever thought he would during that day. And when I think of what Jesus does for us, what he did for that young lad, I get goosebumps when I think of that. My goosebumps come up when I think of what Jesus did for that child. You can imagine this. Now, my mother, she was wonderful. I had a great mom, but I can imagine that when I would walk into my house and I had more in my lunch than I had when I left, she would have gone, where have you been? But when the child said to her, I've been with Jesus. I have been with Jesus. And you know what he did? He fed over 5,000. The Bible talks 5,000. We know it was more. He fed 5,000 with my lunch. And Mom goes, What a story about what Jesus does for us when we don't even know we are doing it. I think it's so wonderful that he uses us, and I was talking about the church here. You were talking about what can you do? What can be used? You don't know, but you just give him your lunch. Give him your lunch, and that boy did, and he fed all of those people what we can do. My little second, this is one of my favorite. I know I said about the lad, but I don't know. Go with me to Matthew 14, 28, 29. Matthew 14. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. I love this about Jesus. You know, Jesus shows up when things are pretty dark, when the waves are going like this and the boat's crashing. We talked about some of us having that struggle. Jesus shows up. Not only as he shows up, but when he shows up, come here. Now, to me, it is one of the most fascinating that Jesus looked right at Peter. Now, he knows Peter's heart. But still, he looks at Peter and he says, come here. Come see me. And I can imagine Peter, good old Peter. At first response, after he recognizes and they think there's a ghost, and you know the story, as he looks at Jesus, Jesus said, come. But you know what, Jesus? If it had been me, I said, Peter, I know you. Stay in that boat. I know your heart. I know what you're doing. Stay there. Jesus didn't say that. He says, come on. Come on. And so Peter, with all the gusto he could have, and I love it, I could just see the picture, steps over the side of the boat. Whoa. And I can just imagine Jesus smiling, just waiting for Peter to recognize what was going on. And then he takes his other foot. Now, I like water skiing, and I like staying on top of the water, but that's about as close to water walking I could do. But I can say, when stepped over, and I can see Peter going, oh. And you know, Jesus never condemned him. He said, keep coming. My friend Jesus said, keep coming toward me, even though I know that in your heart, and we know that as Peter's going like this, oh. Now, knowing me, I would have gone, ooh, okay, all right, woo, look at this, whoa, wow. And we know Peter was that kind of a guy, and he'd be going, woo, yes, okay, I'm. Peter doesn't go too far. And what does he do like we do? We have our eyes on Jesus. He is calling us to come to him. But somehow something distracts us. And God, in his loving heart, through Jesus, says, keep coming, even when Peter, like I would, turn around. Hi guys, look what I'm doing, and we know Peter. The more I get to know about Peter, yeah. Hey, how you doing over there? Oh, as soon as Peter took his eyes off Jesus, he began to go down. He looked down instead of looking up and looking toward Jesus. But here's my friend. You see, I'm thinking of old human. After all these years that I've lived life, I know me. My dear wife, she knows me too. She knows me really well. We've been married almost 50 years. In December, we'll have married 50 years. Is that good? Yeah, okay. And so I can imagine that Peter missed the idea. He could have gone all the way on the water and hugged Jesus. He could have gone all the way. But he looked on himself. That doesn't sound like us, does it? He looked on himself. He looked away from my friend Jesus. And when he did that, and he looked down instead of looking up and toward Jesus, he began to sink. Now, this is where I love. Jesus didn't do what I would. I would have gone, well, see, that's what you get for not looking at me. Just go down there and just sink. Go down there. But Jesus did not do that. I can see now, as I said, I can see Jesus smiling. He says, I can imagine, poor Peter, I got a lot of work here. I got to work with this guy. And we know it was a long time. I got to work with this guy. And Jesus didn't let him drown. He reaches down and he pulls him up. Now, I believe that is one of the most exciting things that Jesus can do for us, is when we're going down, he'll reach down and pull us up. He will not let go. He will not let go. And he did not let me. I'd have said, okay, go swim. Go on. But Jesus did not. Jesus is different. Jesus is my lover. Reach down. Now, we don't know the whole story about pretty soon they go back to the boat. I can imagine Peter going, oh man, I'm so sorry, and hanging on to Jesus, and Jesus says, I've got you. Let's get back in the boat. And they got back in the boat together. Jesus saving him from his own self. That's why I love Jesus. He saves us if we don't look down and we look at and up. He will do something. Now, this one. This one here, I have to find. I'm getting there. Bear with me. John 13:20-21. Verily, truly, I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. This is where the pictures, the little snapshots, a little fuzzy. After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, verily, truly, I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. This is one of the saddest stories in the Bible. But you know what? My friend Jesus, knowing that he was going to be betrayed by one of his disciples, and we know too that Judas asked to be a part of discipleship. He asked. Jesus did not choose him. He asked. And Jesus did not refuse him. Jesus could have refused, but he didn't refuse him. And in that upper room, after they had the Lord's Supper, sometimes it's really tough to think about this. But as Jesus looked at Judas, the disciples weren't sure what was going on. A lot of things, ideas in their head. Who is it? What? Again, my friend Jesus, if he was me, I would have looked at Judas and say, okay, Judas, the rest of the disciples, that's him. He's going to go right now, and he's going to go out and he's going to pay money to have me crucified. I want you to know this, and let's really work with him. Let's go out and grab him and keep him. My friend Jesus didn't do that. My friend Jesus did not condemn Judas in front of those individuals that were there. He refused to condemn the one that was going to betray him. When I think of how important Jesus is to me and how he is important to you, when I think that Jesus at this point could have said, look it, we've got to stop him. We know from the Old Testament that was not going to happen. But Jesus, I'm sure on these other stories he was smiling. I'm not sure on this one. And I'm sure that he was crying inside, that he was looking at one of his disciples who was going to turn on him. What kind of a Jesus is that? That will not condemn those who are condemning him. He loves every one of us. My last one here, my last little snapshot, Acts 9, and I have Acts 9, 3-5. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. He replied. What a story. What a snapshot of a man who thought he was doing right in betraying Jesus. But isn't that like Jesus? Stop you in your tracks. Say, wake up. I'm here. I don't know if it's going to be a bolt of lightning. I know with me, when I was drafted into the military and on my way to Vietnam, I had to really ask God. And I asked Jesus, my friend, what's going on here? What's happening? But you know, he had something for me. I didn't know it then. But it was like a stop. It was like a light. Something's going to happen. Your life is going to change. Hang on. I'm with you. Now, we know that Saul had an I problem. Me. I want to get in charge. I want to be in charge. But Jesus turned it into an EYE and even blinded him for a period of time till he recognized who Jesus was. Jesus will go to all lengths to be with you and to save you. Last story. I keep saying that, right? Last story. There was a preacher, and he was getting up to preach, and he looked at the audience, and there were a couple of young men sitting in the audience, and he was eyeing them, but didn't pay too much attention, but he noticed that they were curious. And he says, I have an old preacher friend here. Hey, come on up here and just tell us about Jesus. Just come up here and tell us a little bit about how you feel about Jesus. And the old preacher walked up, and he said, I was a fisherman, and I was out on the ocean, and I had my son and a friend with me, and I knew how to sail, how to drive the boat, and as things began to happen, the wind came up, the waves got higher, the boat started rocking and rolling, and he kept trying to keep it under control. And all of a sudden, the boat turned around, turned upside down, but kept floating, and the old fisherman and the two boys got cast out into the water. The sailor looked and he goes, oh, what am I going to do? He looked out, saw the two boys. Things were going quickly. He knew something had to happen. And he looked out at the two boys and he reached for a life rope and recognized there was only enough for two. He looked out the two boys, and he knew he had to save somebody. And as he looked at the two boys, he realized that one of them was his son, the other was his friend. And the son and the friend were, oh, Dad, help, help, help. The son, the sailor knew, was a Christian. He knew his friend wasn't really a Christian, wasn't doing too well. In a split second, the father took this life rope and gave it to the son, not his son, but gave it to the son that was not a Christian. And he said goodbye to his son, never to see him again. He pulled in his friend. They were able to work around and somebody was able to save them. The old man says, I know that's a terrible story, but God loves us, like Solomon. The old preacher got off, went and sat down. The young preacher went on and talked about God's love and everything. And he looked at those two boys that are sitting on the front row, and they were getting rather agitated. So he had a call, and the service ended. The two boys walked up to the old preacher now. That is a terrible story. Why in the world would that sailor give up his son who was a Christian and the one that wasn't? Why would he do that? The old preacher grinned. And the boys were still giving him a bad time. And he turned around and he says, I'm going to tell you, boys, see that man up there? The preacher up here grinned, and the old preacher looked at those boys and he said, see that preacher up there? And of course he was smiling. He said, that's the one I saved. That's the one I saved. We know John 3:16 that God gave his life for us. He came to die for us. That's why he's my friend. I have a song, I have a special group, and maybe some of you know the Booth Brothers. I have a special song that I want you to hear. Then I met the Master. Have you met Jesus today? As I close the album, I hope that you have met him and you love him because he's our friend. So many times we don't think of Jesus as our friend, but as we find out what he's really like and that he cares about us, he died for us. He sent out the rope to save us. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for this Sabbath, for us being here in this place of worship, to learn about you. We just had a glimpse, a few snapshots, but you have so much more for us. Thank you. We love you. Amen.